Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with Nate.
Hey!
And with Jeffro Johnson.
Hey, y'all.
The author of Appendix N, a literary history of Dungeons and Dragons. Do I have that right?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. Also, the owner of the blog autoduelist.blogspot.com, or no, WordPress. Hell.
It's jeffro.wordpress.com.
Jeffro.wordpress.com, where he talks about old school role-playing games and science fiction and pulp fiction and such matters. So tonight we are getting together to talk about H.P. Lovecraft's poem, Nemesis. One moment, sorry.
The intrusion of youngins.
Yeah, which I have to say today is a particularly frightening. Oh, wait, great.
Okay, sorry. I was interrupting for a moment, but anyway, before I got to that though, I was actually going to do a first and take us. Due to some problems with my computer, I'm actually recording on my phone, and I don't have a very good tripod setup or anything like for that. So I am eschewing video tonight. If you tune into these to for the sake of my handsome visage, I apologize for your loss. But
hey, they can still see me.
If you tune in for Nate's,
I'm the one holding up the whole live video here. If you're tuning in for my handsome visage, you need to get your eyes checked.
So, anyway, before we got to the poem itself, I was going to do something a little new. I'm going to try not to make this habit, but we'll be getting just a little bit off before we even get to the poem, because of that is kind of that I just saw recently. There is a fantastic website, Gutenberg.org, which is it's Project Gutenberg, and it is they host just thousands, tens of thousands, I don't know a number, many works in the public domain, in various forms that can be downloaded and enjoyed and read by people all over. And I recently saw some news via Vox Day's blog that the person who is in charge of that site was talking about eliminating hate speech or processors to hate speech. And this was just... Now, to be fair, I think he was... Go ahead.
They're also going to eliminate pre-crime, so...
That too. And now, to be fair, to be entirely fair, I think he was mostly talking... at the time, he was talking about
real bad,
people
buddy.
submitting... What's that?
You're cutting it out real bad.
Right. Man. Okay, right. No, I know what the problem is. I think I should be able to fix it. Maybe. I hope. Let me see if I can get a better signal. But at the time, I think he was talking primarily about new works like being submitted to the site, but the way these things, it's going to creep, it's going to expand, and if they went through with this, it would start an enormous purge eventually, which is just because literally everything
it would destroy the project.
Because everything written before 1950 probably has quote unquote hate speech in some form, and it's just, oh gosh, it's he walked it back, but it's not good. It's not a good sign for the future.
Yeah, yeah. When I was doing Appendix N, there was a good chunk of the books that I read directly from that, and a lot of the before 1940 stuff is on there, and that really is the good stuff. You can't get a whole lot of it, unless you know what to look for. But even used bookstores don't have a lot of it, and without something like Amazon or Gutenberg, it's just it's it's the stuff is just completely outside of the scope of normal critical conversations of science fiction and fantasy history and everything else. So it's with that project being there, being able to talk about this stuff and have people just go and look and read for themselves. That's like really, it's hugely important because it opens up how long the culture war has been going on, and what really the scope of how bad everything since 1980 really is.
So but yeah, so if anyone out there has the financial and or technical means to do something about it, it sounds like it would be a good idea if someone started up a backup of that site that will not surrender to such nonsense. Anyway, having said that, Nate, would you like to read the poem tonight?
Sure. Kick it up for me.
Oh, shoot. Like I said, I'm not on my computer. I don't know how to do screen sharing on this.
Well, watch me divvy dab at my own phone for just a moment. Dang.
Man, Zachlog, you sound really terrible, man.
Yeah, I get worse at night whenever I'm sick. So most of the day I've been a good bit better, but I'm headed downhill at the moment.
Yeah. All right.
We already rescheduled from a week ago, so I'm just gonna push them. Nate, you got it?
I got it. Nemesis by H.P. Lovecraft. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night, I have lived over my lives without number, and I've sounded all things with my sight. And I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with right. I have whirled with the earth at the dawning, when the sky was a vaporous flame. I've seen the dark universe yawning, where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. I had drifted o'er seas without ending, under sinister gray clouded skies, with the many forked lightning is rending, that resound with hysterical cries, with the moans of invisible demons that out of the green waters rise. I have plunged like a deer through the arches of the hoary primordial grove, where the oaks feel the presence that marches, and stalks on where no spirit dares rove. And I flee from a thing that surrounds me, and leers through dead branches above. I have stumbled by cave-ridden mountains that rise barren and bleak from the plain. I have drunk of the fog-fetid fountains that ooze down the marsh and the main. And in hot cursed tarns I have seen things I care not to gaze on again. I have scanned the vast ivy-clad palace and trod its untenanted halls, where the moon, writhing up from the valleys, shews the tapestried thing on the wall. Strange figures discordantly woven, which I cannot endure to recall. I have peered from the casement in wonder at the mouldering meadows around, at the many-roofed village laid under the curse of a grave-girdled ground. And from the rows of white uncarven marble I listen intently for sound. I have haunted the tombs of the ages, and I have flown on the pinions of fear, where the smoke-belching Erebus rages, where the Jokuls loom snow-clad and drear, and in realms where the sun of the desert consumes what it never can cheer. I was old when pharaohs first mounted the jewel-decked throne by the Nile. I was old in those epochs uncounted, when I, and I only, was vile. And man, yet untainted and happy, dwelt in bliss on the far Arctic Isle. Oh, great was the sin of my spirit, and great is the reach of its doom. Not the pity of heaven can cheer it, nor can respite be found in the tomb. Down the infinite eons come beating the wings of unmerciful gloom. Through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber, past the wine-mooned abysses of night, I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight. And I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright.
Okay. Thank you.
So to open
Nate.
comment, that is the first time I've ever pronounced it as above instead of above.
I think that one can slide a little bit for the sake of the rhyme. But
Yeah.
But so usually I let the special guest lead off, but I was talking to Jeffro beforehand, and he said and I told him, just come anyway, and we'll see what we can do. He said that he didn't feel like he had a really good read on this poem. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw out the biggest, overall interpretation of mine. It starts and ends with through the ghoul-guarded gateways of slumber. And I think what this poem is supposed to be is someone who is from the point of view of someone who is experiencing these terrifying and vivid dreams that are casting him into these other times and places. And so I think that's what brings. Does that make sense to either or both of you?
Yeah.
That is not how I read it, but I can definitely see where the conclusion would be drawn.
Yeah, I read it. Yeah, my first take on it, which I wasn't really confident in, but I took it as a riddle at first. The way this whole thing plays out is very similar to some of the riddles from The Hobbit, and so I find myself like wanting to guess the answer here. But after reading it, rereading it, and rereading it again, I think it's doing exactly what it says. I think well, I mean, you get down at the end there. You have someone here who obviously can sort of transport themselves like some sort of Jack Kirby comic strip thing to see all these epic things, but there at the end, this is someone that can recall the time when man was untainted. So like he's the
Well,
Garden of Eden.
The funny thing about that, though, is, when man was untainted and happy, when man yet untainted and happy dwelt in bliss on the far Arctic Isle, and he places this, Edenic period of man in Iceland, like, in Greenland. I don't know.
Okay. Well,
I
if
would
it
go
had
with
been
Iceland. I mean, volcanoes, angels with swords of fire.
if it had been Antarctic, we'd know it was a shout out to the Mountains of Madness. So
that too. But maybe Trump read this one and that's why he wants to buy Greenland. I don't know. But yeah, and then the other thing about this, which it's kind of hard to place, hard to figure out exactly what it means, is just the name of the poem.
Yeah,
which is Nemesis, which today it just means more or less enemy or something that's going to destroy you. In the original sense, which I'm fairly sure Lovecraft was a nemesis was a from Greek mythology, and it was a spirit of vengeance that destroys people who have offended the gods.
Oh.
And go ahead.
Yeah. So you have this person here. They've sinned. What we don't know what they did, and we know they can't die. We know they can't really live, and they just have this eternity where they're sort of inside a tomb, having these weird Lovecraftian drug-induced type visions.
No,
well, it doesn't say they're inside a tomb. It says he has haunted the tombs, and it's plural. So he's done. So like where whoever this is dwells, we don't really have a very read on that.
It's the dude.
Well, it seems to me that he dwells in the air, which draws me to the conclusion that I agree with, which is that this is sort of the biography of Satan. This is him talking about, hey, look, I was before all of this, and, I have been everywhere in this world, and I've seen all the things in it because this is my world. And, I mean, you get the idea that this is a, old and knowledgeable creature.
Yeah.
Yet it's completely overshadowed by a hostile power, and it's tortured by that. I mean, it talks about all these things, he's the father of darkness, right? So before daybreak, it's the last few moments before, the red-edged sword of the day comes down and, defeats the darkness for its next iteration, and so it seems like that would be just hateful to him, and he'd shriek and scream with fright, knowing what's about to fall on him, that his realm is about to be rolled back one more time.
Right.
And so, he's been the observer, and, the observer and eventual inheritor of all these fallen kingdoms that eventually, one way or another, are brought down by their sins. And so, he talks about he's in this castle and these things discordantly woven. I feel like, you think about a medieval castle or a crusader castle in Europe anyhow, the tapestries are most likely going to have Christian iconography on them, and these are going to be things that he's just like, I don't want to talk about that.
That's genius.
Go ahead.
I think there's a lot to that. I was going to consider that this was maybe the guy that was went crazy in Call of Cthulhu, and he just has these visions forced on him. But the fact that A, he remembers the fall at the Garden of Eden, and B, that he hates the tapestries. That's pretty solid.
And from our last discussion, And from our last discussion that we had with you, Jeffro, remember you're talking about sort of the base plate to get to the weird is the normal and the moral. And so, you know, the idea that this poem is about, you know, because that would be for most of, you know, so from the Western world at that point would be Christianity. You know, it makes sense to set this arch nemesis character as the arch nemesis of Christianity. You know, the you know, the fallen sun. You know, the morning star that was that came down to earth and all that. You'd think it makes sense for all this to be actually the devil, and you know his characteristics fit.
But
the things he remembers and says, they all fit. So that's why I agree with that reading. I mean, the idea that it's, you know, somebody trapped in fantastic nightmare could also be true, but it's not the reading that I tend to side with.
Jeffro?
Yeah.
Were you about to?
Yeah, the idea, you know, now, like, there's definitely a trend of late to take monstrous evil things and sort of respin them to be nice and fun. So, you know, everything from, say, The Wicked Witch of the West got redone for a Broadway musical to be shown that, you know, she really had. If you understood her, you know, you could see where she was coming from, and that somebody was mean to her first, probably the good witch, something like that. Um, or all the love stories with werewolves and vampires, just over and over. But this one here, that the idea that the devil is is absolutely, completely consumed with fear, is that's not an image that I get from popular culture. That I'm not sure I can think of any reference point where that would be something that someone would just take for granted. Usually, you know, it's sort of the even in the 19th century, you know, just the very or the devil went down to Georgia, right? You know, this guy who's here to take your soul, and he's very much thinks he has a winning hand, and and sort of revels in it, you know. But this is a very, very different take.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think this is a much truer take because, I mean, the words are spoken in that sort of grandiose style. You know, he's like, I've done all this. You know, I've sounded all things with my sight. I've seen kingdoms rise and fall. I was there before the beginning, and, you know, all this. But in the end, the last words, he shrieks with fright because he knows what's coming. He knows he's beaten. And so he lives this, you know, this existence, this bitterness. Yeah, and so, yeah, like I said, a lot of times in modern sort of media, you see the devil as like the suave and powerful character. And, you know, where there is a devil, he'll be there. But you probably won't see God in the same setting. You know, and so the devil is getting a lot of good press these days, making him out to be a more, you know, interesting and powerful character than he ever should be. But like I said, I think this poem gets him pretty right. You know, he still has a grand idea of himself, but he understands that what he's against is more.
I will say, you know, one thing that would count against this being the voice of Satan, or at least that being what the author intended. I'm pretty sure Lovecraft himself was an atheist, and if you look at the rest of their, like he tends to avoid the kind of, you know, God and the devil, kind of setup, and the horrifying things that are out there, um, you know, basically can consider, if they notice us at all, we're basically ants, and we're killed not because they hate us, but just because we happen to be in their way. And so that doesn't fit in with the rest of Lovecraft, I don't think, very well. But that doesn't mean he didn't do something different here.
Yeah.
So,
some of the critique I read mentioned that there is, I guess, one of his creatures that also fits this really well, but for the life of me, I can't remember the name. It's like Narfafarfagarf. Give me 1 second.
Nyarlathotep Hotep.
Yeah, that's the one.
But
he carries. So they're saying he carries a lot of, they're saying he carries a lot of similarities, with the devil, and also is terribly afraid of the sun. So like, he fits.
So
yeah, I would agree that I'd agree that the a straight ahead treatment of the devil would be out of character for Lovecraft, at least as fiction. But
although curiously, a lot of his poems appear to be concerned with, because every time I go poking around trying to find a poem by Lovecraft, like half of them are about Christmas, and I'm like, that's not what I would. I don't think like Santa ends up delivering a present to Roulier and is driven mad by the sight of awakening Cthulhu. So it seems a little strange. Maybe his poetry is a very different kind of thing from his fiction.
I don't know.
I will say
it's just not, it's sort of in the same way the old pulp magazines are about the superlative, right? And so when you have John Campbell taking over Astounding and changing the name to Analog, I thought that's a real tell of how modernism sort of came into a field and sort of ruined it. But I think with poetry, it's you really have to be willing to embrace the sublime in a way that you don't necessarily have to do so much with fiction.
I'll say another thing that I find kind of interesting about this poem, and having read several of Lovecraft stories, not everything by any means, but I think poetry is good for him, because this exactly as like evocative and weird and creepy as any of his fiction stories, but because X number of beats per line, and he's got a rhyme. He has a kind of economy of language here that, like, he can be a bit wordy in his fiction, and I think poetry actually is kind of good for him in that way.
I mean, I love the just that line where the black planets roll without aim, where they roll in their horror unheeded, without knowledge or luster or name. That's just that's a really, it's just powerful. It's powerful. It's evocative. The unknown. Something. Well, I guess that goes back. That's a to have something that's not named is utterly forsaken, right? It's just really good stuff. I don't know how you would really get that across in fiction.
It's
so
I think this sort of story I think this sort of story really does lend itself to verse, and because you're right, it is sort of a slimming thing. It trims the fat in a really necessary way. But just the whole thing, you kind of get the idea. And honestly, it fits with the idea of this, fallen being that's, I don't know, just in my mind, dragons always speak in poetry, right? It's sort of like the grand evil character, hides himself behind that fig leaf of culture to be like, but come on, look, listen to my words and feel the power of my speech. Would a vile creature really have, such a faculty? Wouldn't it just grunt and scream at you? Wouldn't it just shout obscenities until you were overwhelmed? And I just really think it really builds in the character also to be presented in verse.
It's kind of like Saruman from the Lord of the Rings. His one of his greatest powers is in persuading people in saying, well, isn't this just reasonable? Isn't this just the most decent? Well, isn't this just the necessary path that will get us closest to? And he just by his words and the sound of his voice, he puts people under a spell. And so it's a little bit like. So on a slight change of topic, and Nate and I both found this when we were looking around for material about this poem. It's kind of funny. The poem actually also fits decently well to the tune of Billy Joel's.
Oh no!
I wish I didn't have. Yes. One moment.
Piano Man.
That's terrible. See that's really terrible. I hate that you've told that to me.
I didn't want to start off with that, but I had to drop it in at some point. Through the cool guarded gateways of slumber, past the wan-mooned abysses of night,
No.
I have lived o'er my lives without number. I have sounded all things with my sight, and I struggle and shriek ere the daybreak, being driven to madness with fright. The chorus doesn't have a place, but
yeah. See,
there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun overlaps this way. Like XKCD showed me that due to the metering of it, you could sing Emily Dickinson's "Because I Could Not Stop for Death" to the tune of Gilligan's Island. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but in myself and immortality.
See, that's my philosophy with reading old things is always give your take without seeing what everybody else said first. So just give that perfectly fresh take. And they go and look later and be like, oh wow, the Billy Joel thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the reason I
actually listened to it, and it's kind of like profoundly creepy because you're like, man, that's it really subverts the tune. I think it works super well. Excuse me. Oh dear.
Yeah, the reason I found it was because when I'm working on memorizing something that's a little on the long side, I'll often see if I can find other people, reading it on YouTube and listen over to theirs for a while. It's also amusing when I hear them. I hear them make some pretty obvious errors, like Sargon of Akkad did one on what is it? Ancient Recitations, I think, is one of his like secondary channels. And he did he has one from Child Roland to the Dark Tower Came, which I also recorded. And he I know which text he was using because they accidentally skip a line, or not skip a line, but they actually cut out part of a line, and it just doesn't make any sense. It's obvious there's something wrong there, but he apparently didn't notice this. So, and now I'm getting way off track.
Well, to bring it back to the poem, I thought it was interesting to continue playing my favorite reading of it is the whole thing about it being like the devil or an analog thereof is he talks previously about seeing the primordial state of the universe, but then after a couple of stanzas he's on Earth and he never goes anywhere else. It's like it's like he's here and he can't leave, and so somehow he is banished to this world.
Oh wait, so
and
like verse 2 would be the primordial universe, but before like when light was separated from the darkness, and then the next verse before the land had been separated from the water.
Yeah, and he's down there.
I have heard.
Oh,
and then
okay.
now in the third verse you have plant life reference there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you don't get man until down so you're getting sort of a survey of history from a very grand scale here. I know you've got.
Yeah, I have heard.
You've got before you got that palace with the tapestries. You've got the caves, and is that primordial ooze? No, that's not primordial ooze in that verse because you have plants before that and everything else. So. And then you've got the three punches of one the reference to the Garden of Eden, two the reference to this guy's sin, which is that's the sin of his spirit, and then not heaven can't even fix it for this guy. So that's I don't know. I think this is checking out.
Yeah, I have seen someone talk about this one, it's a progression of the planets coming into existence, life emerging from oceans, and eventually you get to the point where man is stumbling around, but by that point he was old when the pharaohs first mounted the jewel-decked throne. By the he's already ancient, and I think you could probably say worn out, just exhausted at that point.
No, I'm not getting you definitely get it. The evolutionary timescales explicitly laid down in a lot of Lovecraft fiction, but I'm not getting that here. I'm getting that this is it feels like a very straight ahead handling of an Old Testament view of the history of everything. With nothing really intruding on it to spoil it. No, I'm not seeing the modernism.
That's good. I'm on a low modernism diet, so I didn't want to go over and gain philosophical pounds.
Yeah, no, modernism is not gluten free.
What was
It's high carb.
Yeah.
And now bread
ain't got any meat
is
in it.
poison.
Eating bugs would be a step up from modernism.
Oh God,
Well, I
don't
did
bring
that
her up,
yesterday.
please.
So-
Uh,
I had a bug yesterday. I got into my car and I was like yawning because 2 in the morning. And I'm like, got a tickle in my throat. I'm trying to swallow and I feel a little. I was like, oh great, I'm gonna just take a bite of this apple now and knock whatever that is down. So if I start manifesting strange powers, I'll let you know.
well, I think I've kind of covered most of what I wanted to say about this. Jeffro, any other things any other points you wanted to hit?
uh, really great poem, great selection. I like that I had to read it many, many times to start to get somewhere with it, and then talking about it with you guys, getting the rest of the way there. What an experience. What a it, poetry is not really something that I would have thought that I would like, particularly something as dense and enigmatic as this. But what a treasure. I'm really glad this exists, and I'm really glad that Lovecraft made this. This is a very different side of him than his fiction presents, and uh, I just encourage people that are fans of the Weird Tales authors to go ahead and seek out this stuff because if all you're getting is the fiction, you're not getting a full picture of the literacy of the pulp era authors, just how developed they were.
That actually reminds me. I've been so far. I've got H.P. Lovecraft, and I've got Robert E. Howard, both of whom wrote a fair number of poems. I'm trying to find other pulp authors from that period who also wrote poetry. And I'm not sure where to look for this kind of thing. So if anyone, if you're watching this and someone from that period, a pulp author, someone who wrote for those kind of magazines who also did poetry, please tip me off. I'm interested to see what else, because from having from my first thing where I was reading a collection of Solomon Kane stories by Robert E. Howard, and then there's a poem in the middle, a couple of poems at different points in this. I'm like, well, that's kind of odd, and started looking into these kind of things, and there's some really interesting stuff. And so if you're watching this and you happen to know about that, know about someone else who fits that description, please tip me off. I'd love to incorporate more of those authors into this series. But Nate, did you have anything else you wanted to add tonight?
I'll caution all of our listeners. Frank, actually, I didn't actually say this earlier, but I kind of didn't like discussing this poem, given how I came down on it. And was like, yeah, okay, not sure I like this, this speak of the devil sort of thing. But I decided to go along with it because of this. It shows him as truly weak as he is, and it does paint him as the enemy. It's sort of this force of decay and loss. And he's just as active today, more so, than he ever has been. And so we need to be on our toes. We need to watch out. And, as a believer, I would exhort you to look around, try and find his hand in things. and see where see where the Nemesis is active, and then look also on the other side of those coins to see, where the Savior is active. I think that honestly, it's not hard to see where the enemy is working. But with this epidemic of suicide we've got going on in the country, I just want to exhort people to go ahead and try to look for where the Savior is active too, because you'll find him in all the same places if you look. And let that give you hope. Not all the universe is madness.
Unless you're H.P. Lovecraft.
Well, he had a real weird lens.
Okay. Well, thank you both for joining me tonight. This has been fun, and I my audience enjoys it as well. And good night, guys. God be with you.
Adios.
Also,